going to go ahead and get started then, because I think this is everybody who's going to be here. We're joined today by a panel of people who are passionate about education, and particularly about public education, from a relatively new group called Grand Rapids for Educational Justice that has been drawing attention to what they would call a two-tier system within the Grand Rapids public school system. You've done some reading about that. But I'm excited to hear from them. Many of them have experience as educators or with the system. So I'm grateful for them to be here with us today. And I'm going to have Jack introduce the rest of the panel, but I met Jack before. Jack has been involved in education for a long time, had sort of a full career, and then went back as a second career at Union High School, so one of the public high schools in town, and had some epiphanies about how that system was functioning, and has since become a fairly passionate advocate for reform in the public school system in Grand Rapids. I think that's fair to say, yeah?
Very fair.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Jack and allow him to introduce the rest of our panelists today. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Doctor. I am really pleased to have this group, particularly this morning. We've talked for weeks about the injustice in the educational system, which we're familiar with. That's here in Grand Rapids, but I think you're going to see a real diversity of perspective coming together to prove the point that there is injustice in the system. And I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to have each person say something about themselves. Ann Swisher, who was in education, and I knew her as a teacher when I taught for over 20 years.
Yes.
Ann?
I have worked in at GRPS for 18 years. Before that I was in New Hampshire, which has a very different kind of way they educate their kids. But my experience was as a support staff, I sat in the back of the room and watched the teacher teach, and I watched what was going on in the back of the room, which I would always encourage teachers to do that. Watch what's going on in the classroom with the students. So I am here, my last 5 years in GRPS was with young adult students 18 to 26, about your age range, who had various disabilities, all kinds of disabilities. And the point was, people your age, you want to go out, you want to have fun. I mean, you all are doing what you do at your age. And this is also true with people with disabilities. So I was teaching advocacy, teaching these kids how to advocate for themselves. But then also at the same time, I was watching what Grand Rapids Public Schools was doing to the program, was doing to the other programs in our building. So I've seen a lot. So there you go.
My name is Joe Anderson. I have a past experience with Calvin College. I am a Calvin College graduate, so you guys were my adversaries 45 years ago. I'm very pleasantly surprised to see a lot more diversity on this campus than it was 45 years ago.
Yeah.
I played sports here, and it was quite an experience. So, having said that, I have been a teacher, 20 years with Grand Rapids Public Schools, 2 years with Battle Creek, and 3 years with Kentwood. And I've taught at Davenport College as both a counselor and instructor for 7 years, which makes me old. I've been involved with Jack. We both taught together at a couple of places in Grand Rapids. We both commiserated together because of the lack of textbooks. Actually, people pushing students to be their best. Every Monday morning in Grand Rapids, there was a fight to get to the copy machine because we didn't have textbooks to pass out to our students, so we would copy the next chapter. And the teachers fought about time to get to the copy machine. And we thought that while we were employed, we could be a support system for the students, but we find that it's probably better to approach the community and let them be aware of some of the problems that exist and maybe affect change that way. So that's why I'm.
Morning, everybody. My name is Kyle Lim. I actually graduated from Calvin in 2012. A lot of my work history, I haven't actually ever been a teacher, haven't officially worked in a school building. My work has been around student advocacy. So if a student or a parent is noticing something's coming up in their schools, for example, they think their child's being suspended unfairly, if they need somebody to help represent them for a special ed meeting, an IEP meeting, or anything like that. Myself and a team of folks that I worked with would go and accompany parents and students to navigate those situations. So over the course of doing that, we found that we were overwhelmingly representing students of color, poor students, and their families. And that these kinds of push-out dynamics, being suspended, being pushed into special ed programs, was happening across lines of race and class. And so doing this work with GREJ gives us an opportunity, I think, to illuminate some of those dynamics of the education system and to advocate particularly from a community perspective around what change might look like.
Thank you. I'm not a Calvin grad. Unfortunately, I did graduate. I say that because I'm in the presence of the Knights, right?
Yes.
Well, I'm a Scot. I graduated from a college many moons ago. But I've stayed in touch with the league for a number of reasons. One, I was at Albion College and coached and taught there for a while. And then I still stay in touch with MIAA students, some of who are my relatives up at Alma. And I think it's a great atmosphere. I think it's just a wonderful place. So it's a real thrill to be here kind of back in homeschooled MIAA. You know, we live in a accused two-tier society. Let's be honest about it. We just remember historically a few years ago a group called Occupy that sat in Zuccotti Park in New York and came out with a moniker that said 99% versus the 1%, and the bull standing behind us, representing Wall Street, is a philosophy and an economic system which is favorable for the 1% and not the 99%. So obviously you see right from the get-go, economically, the structure for a two-tier system. Whether you agree with it or not, it's mentioned as a separation. The billionaires in the United States, we're told today a small group of billionaires have as much wealth as 50-60% of Americans. Once I heard that if Gates stood at the Mississippi River, he could point across the river and say, I have more money than everybody on that side of the river, no matter which side of the river he stood on. And we can split hairs with statistics, but we do know there's accusations of a two-tier system in the healthcare industry. There's just repeated indications of a two-tier opportunity system. Middle class shrinking, upper class getting more wealth, the poverty levels raising, which Ann is going to talk about. So with that backdrop, my interest and experience was in the education system. Having been a coach, I'll be quite honest with you, nothing political ever crossed my attention for years. Until, as Jill said, I started to see huge discrepancies in the experience I had educationally in a school down by Lansing, Michigan, and what I was experiencing day by day in a classroom, where a student climbed through a one-to-one time with a 12-inch machete to kill another student, where a student ran into my room one time under my desk, and an FBI agent ran in with a Glock and had it on his head, and the student asking me, Mr. Prince, will you call my grandmother? I'm not being extreme. Those are the kind of experiences I was just not accustomed to. And from that, there grew an empathy and a desire to at least bring it to people's attention and see what can be done. That's why we stand before you. Please look at the sheet that has 2 columns. Nothing can be this succinct to have 16 points and 10 minutes. But this is something that we're going to use as a rubric anyway for the experience that I had in the school and that my colleagues are going to be speaking about. A two-tier school traditionally has an open door policy for admittance. That's the Statue of Liberty idea I had when I began teaching in 1975. The door's open. If you live in the confines of the neighborhood, you're welcome to the school. That responsibility for that public school extended for that student regardless whether there was a seat available or not. A Tier 1 school has a screening process that tests the student for academic ability and cognitive ability and makes a decision whether or not they're admitted. Worse than that, they can take that test in Grand Rapids in a number of buildings and then be told that really your test scores are not indicative of whether or not you're going to come in. We now hand it over to a computer, a mystery computer, nobody knows where it's at, and it will notify you if you've been accepted into this class. Okay. GREJ stands for educational justice. We find that to be a kickoff to injustice and a way to really separate into two paths, one headed towards the 2-1 structure and the other towards the 2-tier. Second point there, we've discovered, and there is a pamphlet out here that was prepared that has a breakdown in Kent County, in Grand Rapids Public Schools, of the percentage of economically disadvantaged students in what are called theme schools. We also think that's synonymous with Tier 1 schools. Grand Rapids has a whole phalanx of theme schools. They're darkened on the sheet, and you can see the dark compared to the light, the dark being the theme schools or the Tier 1 schools. Without going through all that data, it's unequivocal. The number of economically disadvantaged students lie with the traditional Tier 2 schools, of which I taught. 3, there's a high percentage of minority students. The same sheet that you have indicates that. Without taking time to go through, I'm going to move ahead and tell you that the number of minority students, black and brown students at the Tier 2 school is considerably higher than the Tier 1 school. There's also a higher rate of substitutes needed. How high? Well, your doctor this morning indicated he just heard yesterday that at Alger Middle School, where the teacher turnaround is 100% every year, they have a whole new flock of teachers come into Alger Middle School. 35%
Every year, completely new faculty.
Can I throw in that last year 5 teachers walked out of the classroom and left the students at Alger Middle. They just quit.
35% of the teachers at Westwood Middle and at Alger Middle are substitutes on the opening day of school. The Tier 2 school in Grand Rapids Public School system sees a much higher rate of full-time subs. I taught at an alternative ed school called Career Pathways. A teacher screamed out of the room one day, never to be seen again. And the next day, there was a sub, and for the rest of the year, there were subs, some maybe going 1 or 2 weeks at a time before they would quit. We would usually bet at lunchtime whether or not they'd stay through to lunch, many times leaving without any announcement to the office. The Tier 1 school doesn't have that problem. You go to the Tier 1 school in Grand Rapids Public Schools, you're going to have a consistent teacher, and academically that's a great benefit. Let's go real quickly. High rate of unfilled teacher absence with subs. I've been in Union, I've been in Ottawa Hills High School, Alger Middle School. All of these schools have what they call an empty classroom. Students are there, there's not a certified teacher. There may be a gym teacher walk into a physics, well, they don't have physics there, I'm sorry. You may have a gym teacher walk into a literature class, I'm sorry, they don't have literature classes there. You may have a gym teacher walk into a poetry class, no, I'm sorry. You may have a gym teacher walk into a classroom of remedial math that has no math background, day in and day out. This is not an exaggeration, I'm sorry, and I went through that list because the lack of real curriculum in the Tier 2 school is startling. The higher rate of teacher attrition and transfer. How high is that attrition and transfer? Westwood Middle, Alger Middle, and I can go on. If a teacher goes through a whole year, he's a veteran of combat unparalleled. That teacher will not come back. Testimony and testimony over and over again of teachers that just burn out, which is another word for attrition. Retired in the middle of the year. Not the same experience in the Tier 1 schools. The physical plants. Union High School, where I taught with Joe Anderson, The 3 years, the past 3 years, no heat in a number of classrooms. Unfortunately, there were special needs classrooms. Parents were calling me. Brought to the attention of the school, there were promises made to fix that physical plant. Simultaneously, if you picked up the Grand Rapids Press, there was a photo op of all the dignitaries of Grand Rapids opening up the museum school, a Tier 1 school, which, not to be over-exaggerated, looked like a 5-star hotel. There are all the dignitaries with the balloons going up. Meanwhile, Union High School, a place that they've since discovered a huge amount of asbestos, not something indigenous to the museum school. You had a physical plant there that was absolutely non-conducive to concentration, and it was there chronically for a long time. And I could go through other buildings, same experience. And guess where the Tier 2 buildings are? The limited curriculum and extracurricular activities, I taught at Union High School, they had no yearbook. I'd be willing to bet there's not a student sitting here, they went to a school that did not have, I taught at Firewall for a while. We had an electronic yearbook, we had physical yearbooks, we had all kinds of yearbooks. Plays, extracurricular activities in those schools is greatly lacking in the Tier 2 school. Books, I'm not even talking about them, as already been mentioned, you'd be amazed at what they're handing out as textbooks.
Tell them a story about Brenda and Carson.
Go ahead.
Well, so one of our members for GREJ, her son attended Union High School, as did his father. And they used the exact same textbook across generations.
Yeah, the dad's name was in the book.
Yeah, the dad's name was in the book. So that's the kind of, this is 30 years of difference, and there's never been an updated curriculum or investment to purchase new textbooks.
I taught journalism and there was no textbooks. There had never been textbooks. And so I begged, borrowed, and stealed and got the anniversary copy of Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which was pictorially just fantastic. And the students looked at it like it was a treasure. Not because necessarily that it was even the content, but because it was such a nice smelling new book. Many of them have never had that. The percent of college preparedness at Ottawa Hills High School is 5%. That's just not their SAT score. That's their reading abilities, mathematical abilities, science abilities. 5% are capable of going to college, meaning 95% are not. You can look at greatschools.org to verify that. We, this group, look at that number and say that's absolutely a travesty. You go to the museum school, Kyle?
Oh, I just wanted to add something to that. I don't know how familiar you are with how feeder patterns in schools work in a school place like Grand Rapids, but we mentioned Alger Middle School, which has a 100% teacher turnover rate every year. That's a direct feeder middle school to Ottawa Hills High School. So we're seeing this pattern of disinvestment happen throughout the entirety of the system. And beyond that, if you go back to the elementary schools, we can look at the data between schools like Campus, Elementary, Martin Luther King Leadership Academy. All of these are pipelines into the high schools that Jack are talking about, that we see that rate of disinvestment happen throughout the entirety of the kindergarten through 12th grade pipeline. So when Jack lifts up these academic outcomes, it's a result of a legacy of disinvestment, I think, that has happened for these students over the entirety of their educational experience.
And you drove past Campus, because Campus operates out of the old Calvin College facility in Franklin. That's Campus Elementary. Also, Jack, could you quickly just address, because some people, the media likes to talk about increased graduation rates, but you didn't talk about graduation rates just now, you talked about college readiness rates.
Yes.
Could you just quickly contrast that?
The school has made a conscious shift. Instead of talking about the quality of the graduate, they now put the focus on the number of graduates. And the number of graduates can be obtained in very simple ways. One of the most nauseating to me is one that Mr. Anderson is familiar with. It's called E2020, which is a computer that you literally can go from the 9th grade to the 12th grade in a matter of days. And the school gives it validity. The colleges don't. Grand Valley, where I taught and coached at Grand Valley State University, they look at the E2020 student and they're not giving them any academic credit. But it shows up as a graduation number. Go ahead.
Can I tell an anecdote about E20? I taught E2020 for 2 years. It's a computerized program that the reading level is based at about 5th grade reading level. And I, prior to that, had taught 3 years of special ed, and I had a student who came into Union High School that I had had in middle school, and he was taking physics. And I asked him, how in the world are you taking a physics class when I know that you have difficulty spelling physics? And he said, oh, it's easy, Mr. Henderson. He says, they give me 3 chances to take this test. He says, I take them the first time, I mark everything A. They come back and they tell me what I got wrong. He says, I marked the rest of them B. And he said, then they tell me what I got wrong and I marked the rest of them C. You got 100%. He went through 7 classes in 3 months. And I told him, I said, man, as smart as you are, I ought to get a stick and beat you because you're just cheating yourself, you know? But I say that just to say E2020 is a farce. And the kids know it. They know how to get into the programs and change their test scores. Am I lying? They understand the program. They're very computerized, smart that way. And so they just laugh at it and just go through it.
Can I say something on top of that? I worked at Westwood Middle School with my young adult students, or teaching them skills, and it's obvious, but I want to clarify. Why are the behavior problems so bad teachers won't stay? Kids are so bored out of their minds. Because, you know, they're teaching to test, the teachers don't want to teach to test, but they have to teach these stupid tests, so it's standardization testing, and they want all the kids' brains to be standardized. They don't encourage kids thinking for themselves. And that is essential to understand, because standardization makes kids who act up and are bored out of their minds. Yes?
Do they have to teach to standardized tests for funding purposes?
That's how they measure the quality of education.
Okay.
And justify paying teachers what they pay them. Right, Jack, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the thing with the E2020 is that the traditional classroom with the teacher-student interaction is so valuable in the preparation for citizenship. The first lesson I learned in school was that when somebody else raised their hand, they had every right to speak that I had, and I needed to give them the right to speak. A deep-seated value that is really non-present when you sit with a plastic keyboard all day long. The number of people that go into Grand Rapids Public Schools by school of choice at Union, at Ottawa, is less than 1%. There may be one a year where we're seeing 30 and 40% go to the college school, what they call the college prep, or the senior high school, middle school they call it, or the museum school. They're coming from outlying districts. So who does Grand Rapids Public highlight? The schools that for the most part aren't even Indigenous students. They're going to the newer shiny schools where you get all the values on the right-hand column. The violence in the two-tier schools is unprecedented. I literally could get you up out of your seat if I told you some of the things that we have experienced as teachers. Very rarely did it go by I didn't break a fight up right outside the door in the hallway. And some of the other stories are not even permissible here in this environment. The teachers dissatisfied and quieted in the two-tier schools, what does that mean? They see these issues and they try to voice them, and then they're clamped down, and we were told dogmatically, you do not have the right to speak to the media. The teachers are hushed and do not feel comfortable looking at a sheet like this. Lastly, funding disparity with Tier 1 schools, with Tier 1 schools. The private money is pouring into the Tier 1 schools. Pouring. Westwood Middle doesn't have windows. They have plexiglass because they don't want the outside to see in and they don't want the students to see out. Plexiglass, it wasn't built that way. Contractors didn't put it in. The difference in the money is maybe foundationally the biggest cause of the issues that we're facing. Now, real briefly, I want to let the next person speak. Do I have an answer for this? The answer I'm going to tell you real briefly is not what you'd think of. I think that the Malcolm X's, the Angela Davises, the Cesar Chavez, who did not succeed. My hometown is Mason, Michigan. Malcolm X went to school there. I was 7th grade class president. Was told by his English teacher that he might be a carpenter. Dropped out, went to Boston, began to break into people's homes. His greatest skill was taking wedding rings off of people as they slept in their beds. He got caught, put into a jail cell. I told my Tier 2 students this many times. Out of sheer need to stop losing his mind, he began to read with a flashlight on the bottom of a jail cell. Began to realize that his condition wasn't because he was a bad human being, but there was an injustice done to him and his people. And that injustice propelled him to be rated the greatest orator in American history, Malcolm X. Propelled him to a position of leadership that really is unmatched in the black community, and Joe knows it better than I do. Cesar Chavez, what was his recognition of injustice? His dad was told if he cleared 40 acres of an 80-acre farm, he'd be given 40 acres. After years of struggle, he cleared the property. Then the owner of the whole 80 acres backed out of that offer and said, no, you're not going to get that. Mr. Chavez went to a lawyer, said, what do I do to get my 40 acres back? And they said, you got to buy it. The lawyer promised him, listen, you take a loan out and buy it. We'll get a good term for you. The Chavez family couldn't do it. They failed. Lost it. The lawyer went, bought it for pennies, and sold it back to the original 40 or 80 acre owner. Those injustices, they dig down deep in the human being, and it pushes them like no motivation to learn, to expand their mind. If you take that point of view away from the students, the Tier 2 students, you put them on an E2020 machine, or you tell them that the Tier 1 students that are going to these universities, that really that's the only track. If you take that perspective out of their mind, if you take that fire out of their heart, you've done worse damage than putting them into the mold-infested buildings that many of them sit in. But if you can give them a liberal arts education and open up, like the book I tried, when I was in high school, I'll never forget, a teacher gave me a book called Black Like Me. I'm in an all-white rural farm community. What? And it just opened up a window into my mind. Then I was handed Kill a Mockingbird, the injustices there. I was handed The Jungle. I tried to get some of those books into the curriculum of Grand Rapids Public Schools. I was told no, only the books we're reading half of this year are from the Koch brothers. The book is called Atlas Shrugged. It's free though. I'm asking that you realize the value of a liberal education for these students, on top of all the other needs they have, and the suggestions we're going to hear. That's my contribution. That's what I would like them to see have, because you'll get more great thinkers and driven students if you bring the truth into their eyes of the condition they're in is an injustice that's not their fault. That's all I have to say. I would like now to hand this over to Swisher.
Thank you, Jack.
Okay, my portion of this is, obviously it's also education justice. And there's so many stories I could piggyback on Jack, but I'll refrain from that. But basically, the most essential thing is education is a social justice issue. And your generation is unlike any other generation, because you guys have so many things coming at you that your generation is going to have to stand up and fight for. That's why I have this handout suggesting some things that you can do, because you really can't afford to not do anything. Now, you guys are young and you're optimistic, and I hate to tell you, you've got some work to do. Because nobody was telling my generation that. And we were out doing disco and all that stuff. But you guys have some serious work to do. I assume you all know Greta Thunberg and what she's doing. Okay? So my part of this is I think it's essential to understand the history of charter schools in this country. And where was it born? After the Civil War, the Proclamation of Emancipation, freedom was given to slaves. By word, it wasn't in fact truly freedom for everybody. But a lot of black people got very successful. Given the opportunity, they did very well. Well, a lot of poor white people didn't like that for some weird reason. So they started talking about charter schools, basically, segregating kids in schools. People didn't want to send their kids to kids who didn't look like their kids. And these were battles. This is a battle since the beginning of this country, but this came to a crux where African Americans had gotten their freedom, but weren't given freedom. So that's when segregation in education started. And there were battles everywhere. Kids went through hell, I'm sure. In 1948, at the Democratic Convention, and you can look this up online, when they were choosing who their president was going to be, 2 southern states walked out because there was a platform on civil rights in 1948. And these people, Strom Thurmond, one of them, was not going to have it. They weren't going to be forced. In 1954 was Brown versus Board of Education. And that was the Supreme Court stood up to establish fairness. And all this time, people who don't like people who don't look like them, they were trying to figure out how am I going to, protect my kids from these people. So this country really is based on a lot of ignorance. And at this point in your lives, you have an opportunity to meet all kinds of people throughout this country. We're all the same. We all have the same chromosomes, unless you have little things in it, like, I'm talking from special education. But you guys all have to understand how we are all one species. We all came, the source where we all came from was out of the African continent. And I'm sure you've all had at least some kind of anthropology to know how all that worked. With the charter schools, there's a decision that certain kids are going to get a leg up. Now in Grand Rapids Public Schools, it's interesting because they had an African American superintendent who had no experience in teaching. She had been through the system since age 16 as a secretary. So there's something wrong with the system that would do that, I believe. So she comes along, and at a certain point they decide, because the man that was hired from Kansas was horrible.
He was not good.
Horrible. And he has since consequently been fired from the district that went, because I met the people who hired him.
The
And
fact
we
that
said,
another
why didn't you call
The
us?
fact that another district would even hire him is laughable.
Well, we said, why didn't you call the district? So anyway, so that was a horrible mess. So poor Grand Rapids has had really a hard time figuring this out. So they hired this woman, she's a secretary. I know several secretaries who worked with her and said she was horrible. So then, the way the economy is right now is our legislature has decided they're not going to put money in schools. So they're squeezing the school funding, and if a school can't make it on the money they get punished. The example is Benton Harbor last summer. They're going to shut down Benton Harbor. They already closed down Muskegon and brought in charter schools because they're putting the blame on the people who are trying to make this work. Well, isn't it nice that Grand Rapids has private money? And private money always comes with strings attached. So that private money educated this woman, who was newly superintendent, to speak for them in a way. So yes, they tout their opportunity for kids to go to these lovely charter schools. I worked in one. And the fact of the matter is not everybody has the resources to take part in a charter school. You're a kid who is real poor and you go to one of those schools and maybe your clothes aren't as nice as theirs. And maybe you don't speak the same way, or maybe your lunch food smells differently, making you different. And you know how cruel kids are in high school. They can be horrible. But that's set up by the the community of the school. Because I've seen schools where that just does not happen. It is not allowed. In Grand Rapids, there was a principal who did that. So we keep segregating people. Neighborhoods. The number one indicator of success for a student is their zip code. And a really good person to read, I'm sure you have told them about Diane Ravitch.
I have not talked about that.
Reign of Error is.
I was going to talk about we talked about Richard Rothstein a bit. That, you know.
Well, the thing interesting about Diane Ravitch as an educator is she was originally hired by George Herbert Walker Bush the first, to help fix the school system. And she thought, oh, this is great. Oh, I want to be in on this. And as she was in the meetings, she realized this is segregation. So she stopped, and now she's written many books. You can go to TED.com. It's all out there. You can go see it. So she's identifying all these issues. So when my point is, when you talk about charter schools, it's segregation. Those kids who go into preschool unprepared and go on to kindergarten, they're already 2 years behind if they're living in poverty. What are we doing? The question is, and it's the one question that the people who are putting money into education, these private people putting money in, the question is, why are some kids being left behind when other kids who can afford it can take up the opportunity to get the best education? I mean, they're still doing the standardized testing, but they're being given opportunities. I mean, the high school that my kid went to, a kid wanted to play on a lacrosse team, so his parents outsuited the whole team. That's a very generous thing, and I love the fact that kids got an opportunity to play a sport they wanted to play. But how many parents are doing that in Grand Rapids? That really punched me in the face when I saw that happen. So this is really about opportunity, and why can't all kids have the same opportunity? I with my daughter, who was working on her Gold Award for Girl Scouts, her project was a man from a group here in town was a friend of my husband's and said, I want you to start a Girl Scout troop with these refugees. So we got to bring these girls in, and they just sucked up everything we offered to them. We taught them some sewing. We even had a Thanksgiving dinner. And how they blossomed and flowered because they were given an opportunity that was extra nice to have an opportunity in. So I guess what I'm going to say now is that segregation is what the charter school system is based on. Make no bones about that. And people coming in and bringing their money, I mean, they feel good about themselves, but they're not addressing the issue of poverty, which is the #1 reason why a kid fails. And it's all great to have kids in these nice big buildings and opportunities, but I've sat in too many classrooms where kids are made fun of because their clothes smell or they wore the same outfit all week. Even if it's clean, they wore it all week. Kids who haven't been introduced to a lot of educational experiences, like never been to the zoo. I had students, the young adults, who had never been to Lake Michigan. So every year I had to fight to take them to Lake Michigan. But there's schools that take their kids every year to Lake Michigan, and there is no question. And I had worked in that school. So I had to go down and fight for these kids to go to Lake Michigan. And when a kid's never been there and they're like sensory, you probably have heard about sensory issues for kids and learning, getting them to take off their shoes and putting their toes in the sand and not having a panic attack about it. Over the 5 years that we did that, I saw kids really grow from that experience. It might seem small to somebody, but it sure enriched their lives. Because when those kids would go down to Baxter Community Center to learn how to garden, and they put their hands in the soil. Some of those kids had never done that before. And you could see their brains and their synapses from the experience. But that took me, who's kind of crazy about sensory experience and special education, to do that. I fought really hard to do that. So it's going to take educators to do that, but when you've got the system that has all these rules for you. So I'm going to pass it off to you, Joe, but I have a flyer here about things as young adults can do, because this really is going to be up to your generation. And I know you guys keep getting told that, but it really is true. A lot's going to, you're going to have to fight for stuff. Yes?
Was Kyle going through?
Whoever.
Go ahead, Joe.
It doesn't matter to me.
Go ahead.
Because I'm watching, you guys seem sort of shell-shocked. Don't be.
Are you shell-shocked? Raise your hand if you're shell-shocked. I think you got it.
I will tell you, yesterday, and this is just anecdotal, I was in the store looking for some batteries for my camera, and I heard this voice go, "Mr. Anderson." And a student that I had 6 years ago came running out of, I don't know where she came from, and she told me, she said, "You told me in 8th grade to be that girl." And she said, "I graduated from high school, I'm working, I'm going to college part-time." She says, "I'm gonna be that girl." And that's why you teach. That's why you teach. If you want to make a change, I always said, I can't change all of these situations, but I would always look for between 1 and 10 students every year, and I would say, I'm going to make this person a little more aware. If I saw the interest, the spark in the eye, they were in trouble because I was going through them. And so I think, you can affect a lot of change one family at a time. And that was my approach. I have a son who's in Chicago, and he's the executive director of a social organization there. And that's what they're doing. They're mainly focusing on the female heads of households, because they figure that the female will never leave the family. For the most part, males have a tendency to do whatever men do. And so they're focusing on the females and giving them education and training in how to buy houses and teaching their kids how to get your kid ready for school in the morning, because some people don't know how to do that. And they're doing great things. And so I say that to encourage all of you, that instead of having it be a vocation, make it an avocation. Okay, I think that makes a big difference. My emphasis in this is a public policy issue, education and public policy. Sort of the hinder approach for why we need to fight poverty. I had an econ class as an undergrad where we talked about the production possibilities curve. And I remember my professor telling me that there's only so many guns, and guns and butter was the old argument. You can only produce so many guns and so much butter. And my question to him was, if you had more people, couldn't you produce more guns and more butter? And he never answered me. And so I'm saying that what we should be looking for is a way to produce more guns and more butter. Every year, if you look in the Grand Rapids Press, they have a sometimes 3, 4, 5-page edition of all the students who graduated with honors from all the schools around this area. And if you read through that, you'll find someone from Cedar Springs might graduate with a 3.88 and scored a 32 on the ACT. Someone from Christian, I live a block from there, they might graduate with a 3.8 and have a 31 or 33 on the ACT, or do really well on the SAT. And then you look at Grand Rapids Public Schools, someone on a 4-point system, they'll have a 4.669 and get a 17 on the ACT. Or Union, they will have a similar GPA and have a 19. And you ask yourself, why? What's going on here that these students do really well in terms of getting grades, but they do really poorly when it comes to testing? And having been in that system, I can tell you it's the result of the kinds of materials that those students are given to read. Jack and I were warriors together. We had a principal that told us that no child should go home with homework. Don't give your kids homework. It makes them not come back to school the next day. Many different reasons for, excuse me, these kids can't read, so don't give them certain kinds of books. Don't expose them to various forms of literature that I thought was, every high school did this. But we were told not to do it. I got in trouble many times because I just didn't care. Okay? If you're going to fire me, then give me a good reason to feel good about getting fired. So there were certain things I taught: law, government, and civics, and history. And they told me not to teach certain things. And I said, bunk, I'm going to teach what I want. Okay? And I have been pleasantly surprised by the number of students that I've met since retiring who've told me, I'm so glad you did, because when I got to college, everybody there knew a whole lot more about it than I did, but at least I knew what they were talking about. Because we send students from Grand Rapids Public Schools to all of these colleges around here, and most of them last about 3 months. The ones that don't are the ones who determine within themselves, and I have another anecdote about that too, but they determine within themselves, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take advantage of everything that's available out here to succeed. I have a brother who is an assistant dean at Michigan State University, and he was telling me that just about every student from Grand Rapids that comes to MSU is required to take remedial classes. Required, particularly if they're minority students. There's no question about it. I also had 3 sons who went to City High School. I can tell you the difference between my teaching at Union and what my sons had homework from City every night.
So could you contextualize City for them if they're not, most of them
They
are
don't
not
know
from
what City
Grand
High Middle
Rapids.
is?
Most of them are not from Grand Rapids, so
Okay.
they don't know anything about City.
City is kind of the creme de la creme of Grand Rapids Public Schools. It was the brainchild of, I can't even think of his name now. The guy that Jim Manicunas was at one time an administrator for Grand Rapids Public Schools, and it's kind of a blend between a traditional high school and a Montessori approach. If you were studying theater arts at City, you would be given an introductory classes in what theater arts is supposed to be, how to construct all these different things, props. And then you would be, the next year, my kids were sent to Stratford-on-Avon for 3 weeks in Canada, and they stayed there and actually watched the production be put together. They came back home and they were required to learn how to build props. The next year they put on a production. Their senior year, they literally, when it came time for parent-teacher conferences and all that, the students ran the program. It was hands-on, it was application of knowledge, it was it was everything. They get the total approach. They do that in math, they do that in science. In science, as 8th graders, the kids they go out to Lake Michigan, they spend 3 weeks on the beach putting together a portfolio. And then they come back with that portfolio, and each child has to explain, like, if they find Petoskey stones, for instance, let's make it simple. They explain the origins of Petoskey stones and the uses of Petoskey stones. That's the kind of approach City has.
But you have to test in the City and a lottery?
Yes, you do.
It's a test and a lottery?
It's a test and a lottery.
And isn't that also a school where you have to do an interview with the parent also?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I passed the interview. I don't know how I did, but I passed. Okay. But City is ranked in the top 5 schools in Michigan and in the top 50 schools in America.
Joe, can I add something there? The building City was in was Creston, which was your
Yeah,
traditional
right.
high school. The students were forced out of that building And city became a magnet school, which means it draws, I think we.
Countywide.
Countywide, almost 50% of students aren't from Grand Rapids. They're from
And most of the
schools.
parents are financial elites. I'll put it that way.
Can I just add something right there? I'm sorry.
No, good.
I was at a school board meeting, because I'm fairly political, and I heard a young man, he was so darling, and he had a suit on, and he was from the high school, and he spoke to the board, and he said, you know, I got in trouble the other day because I was smoking pot before I got to school. And he goes, what you guys don't realize, you people in the administration don't realize is, you have us under so much pressure to succeed. That was my outlet. And I saw it in my own kids' school. The pressure on kids to keep hating with each other or with teachers, pushing kids. My daughters had friends who were in band, in government, in the journalism class, getting A's in their classes. That's a lot of pressure to be putting on a kid. And one of the news stations just last week did a whole story on why depression is rampant in high school. And, you know, to me, when I went to high school, it was a Catholic school, but I was able to wonder about things and enjoy myself and have intriguing conversations about the topics of the schools. If you're so busy competing to get that A or to get into Harvard, whatever, you lose out on so much. So that's the other spectrum, is the kids who are being pushed so hard. It's awful.
My guess is some of these folks know about being pushed. So they're honors
Well, I'm
students,
sure you
right?
do, guys. I'm sure you do. It's
And
a lot of pressure.
I hope you reimagine, in accordance with sort of what the panel's talking about, what education might be about critical consciousness, about understanding society, and not just about earning top grades and
Because
being
poverty,
depressed all the time.
poverty is engineered.
Yeah.
There's no purpose for poverty, except
That's right.
people are making money off of it.
That's my point.
I was just going to add that city, you know, I talked about the Christian schooling requirement at Calvin. I know at least 2 different faculty members who got waivers to that because their child had been accepted at city. So you're required to send your kid to a Christian school unless they get into city, in which case you can send them to
Really?
city. Oh, yeah.
And as I am opposed to charters, I'll make that known.
Yeah.
But I think that every student should be given an opportunity for a city-like
Yeah.
education.
Yes.
It's unparalleled. The cost of city, it was picked up by the board. We didn't have to pay, well, I think we paid $100 for trips or something like that, which might be cost prohibitive to some people.
Yes, definitely.
But for those people who could not afford it, city had a bank of money that they could have access. And like I said, it's really kind of crazy because as I think back about it, city sort of proves to me, and I'll go into this in a roundabout way. How many of you know that there was a black man invented the stoplight?
The stoplight.
Stop sign, stoplight was invented by a black man, an uneducated black man. Okay? Think about the lives that have been saved because of that. And think about what would happen in this country if everybody was allowed to perform at their highest level of ability. Where would we be? And so from a public policy standpoint, it makes no sense to me to have schools like Ottawa Hills, to have schools like Union. Jack talked about a little bit about, he didn't really get into it. We taught there 8, 9 years, never knowing that there was asbestos in the building. And it was openly exposed. Now, if I die of cancer, I want one of you future lawyers to take my case, okay? Because I didn't know that every morning that I went into my classroom, there was asbestos. in the
You know,
walls.
there are serious government regulations on this. They have to check every year and rebuild, school buildings. So the district had to know. Sorry, Joe.
But it's, when you think about the costs, what if all of these students develop some illness down the road and there is a major lawsuit? Who picks up the cost for that? Normally, the public has to pick up the cost for that. Somewhere or other, you're going to pay for that. And so it makes no sense to me to have kids who are equally as good to be given less to work with as someone else, because you have, and I can't say, well, I say it because I'm a proud parent. Yeah, my kids were real smart, okay? But I know a lot of their friends who were equally as smart. The majority of their friends could have done the work at City and enjoyed it instead of dropping out of school. Point number two, in terms of public policy, is that every year Grand Rapids Public Schools would get, I know when I was at Union, we averaged about 425 incoming freshmen. Union, or Ottawa Hills, I taught there for 6 years, about 440 incoming freshmen. And we would graduate between 89 and 120 of them. The majority of the young ladies would leave because of pregnancies. Who's picking up the cost of that? And we talk about issues inside the school, crime, rape. I'll put it out there because it happens.
Yep.
I had a student go in the bathroom and that's when everybody was sagging. His pants dropped off and he had a gun in his pants pocket. The gun hit the floor and the bullet ricocheted about 29 times and he came out bare. Okay, he dove out of the room because he didn't know if the bullet was going to hit him. Those kinds of things. One of my colleagues and I were doing lunch duty one day, and this kid comes up and he hands her a .45. He says, "I'm not going to kill him today." He says, "You can take this gun." And she's standing there in shock. She puts the gun underneath her head like this and says, "You know, what am I supposed to do with this?" And I said, "First of all, you never point a gun at your head. You know, point it at the ground." We called the police, and sure enough, the gun had jammed. They put it in a cylinder, and with the minute it hit the side of the cylinder, it went pow, it went off. He had tried to shoot somebody, but the gun misfired. Those kinds of safety issues don't have to be, because when you talk to the students one-on-one, they have the same fears, the same trepidations as everybody else. But who wants to go to school every day where if you get in trouble, you're pretty much assured that the guy or girl that beat you up is going to get a 2-day suspension, and they're going to come back and beat you up again. So what do? Well, kids are forced into gangs. Not that they want to be in gangs, but they're forced into gangs because this is what we do. This is how we protect ours from theirs. Okay? I had to combat that with my own children, in that my sons were really big, from 6'4" to 6'9". And so gangs wanted my kids because they could be enforcers. And so I had to stand in the gap and tell them, if you come to my house, expect me to be a gang of one. And sometimes it takes a village, because you have to stand against that kind of thing. But again, I say to you, and I'll stop, this is a public policy issue, because you pay now or you pay later. You enlarge the field for more guns and more butter, or you pay one way or the other. It comes back to the taxpayer, because what we have found in education, particularly the people who support charter schools, are not going to pay. They're forcing that these tier 2 schools are being supported by us. And if they're supported by us, then we ought to have a clarion call to expect better results than what we're getting. So many students who have left Grand Rapids Public Schools that I have met, who go away from this community, re-enter education, learn how to read, really read, instead of reading at a 3rd or 4th grade level, who go to college, who become lawyers and doctors, and they come back here and they tell the same story. You guys didn't give me what I was supposed to have when I was here. And that's a shame.
Can I ask him a quick follow-up, Kyle? So, I completely agree with you that it's a public policy thing, but I can hear the person listening to you or to Jack and stories about violence who says, well, isn't this a culture of violence, right? Isn't this about sort of, yeah,
And
isn't this a culture of violence in the
As a
schools?
minority, I particularly get that.
Yeah, and so how do you respond to the person who says, you know, I don't think this is public policy. I think this is a glorification of violence and rap lyrics or all this kind of stuff, and it's really tries to put it back on the kids themselves.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
I think, first of all, that's too glib of an answer. Because when you say that, okay, cancer is a result of too much exposure to the sun, okay, there are deeper causes than that, which we don't really have the time to get into, but when it comes to the education side of this, I attended Kalamazoo College.
Yeah.
You guys pay a lot of money to go here, okay? I know because K costs more.
Yeah.
So, I'm one of 14 kids, okay? My mom and dad had 14 children. God bless my mother. But we were not poor, but we were not rich. And my father said, I want to guarantee that all of my kids get a high school education. My dad was from the South. In the South, they said that you could have free public education, but they only built high schools on the white side of town. Blacks couldn't go beyond the 9th grade unless you wanted to risk your life every day walking across the freeway and then running the gauntlet of the KKK to get into a high school where you're probably going to get killed by one of your classmates. So very few blacks, if you know older people from the South, have higher than a 6th through 9th grade education. So my dad thought it was a big deal for all of his kids to get a high school education. And he said, beyond that, you got to do it on your own. I'll help you when I can. He said, but there's a whole bunch of you. Okay? All 14 of us have at least an associate's degree. I worked in high school because I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I interned and I changed my mind. Okay? but I was able to, and I know this for a fact, there are libraries, and that's one of the things I would point kids to. If you can't get a book, go to the library. There are any number of ways, if you teach a child resourcefulness, that they can come out of this. My parents would not, we were very regimented in terms of watching TV. My parents never told me I had to get a certain GPA, but if I didn't, my brothers and sisters, the older ones, would beat me up, okay? So there was always that pressure, not from my parents, nor from the school, because most of my teachers told me, they didn't tell me that I would be a carpenter someday. They told me, you know, there's a General Motors plant, you can go get a job. Probably should have, would have made more money, okay? But go to work at General Motors or get a job in a factory. Those were the things that I was told. And I just determined within myself, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. I'm gonna determine my future. And so,
Can I just piggyback on what you're saying, and it's off what you said, but you could talk more about this to me. That idea that black men are more dangerous, there's no proof of that.
no.
It's a mythology that's come from long, long ago. And, you know, most of you here are white people, and we don't understand the language people use freely that is absolutely false. So I'm sure you can...
Can I piggyback off you? This is something that Malcolm X said.
Yep.
He said, most whites will tell you that they are afraid of blacks. He said, but when you look at who really kills who, he said, we never had a Ku Klux Klan. When you look at who blacks kill, blacks generally kill black people. Whites kill both people with impunity. If you look at, I know Black Lives Matter, I don't know how you feel about that, but every day in this country, every day and a half, there's a black man killed by a police officer in America. So I probably should be more afraid of you than you are of me if I look at statistics. So, and I said, I'm not afraid of you. I think you guys look pretty good to me, okay? We can all get along, as the guy said. But the real essence of it is that whites kill blacks more than blacks kill whites.
So watch out for the mythology that people feed, the media especially feeds you.
Yeah.
Okay, Kyle, your turn. Sorry.
Well, I'm happy to keep listening to everybody else. There's a lot of wisdom in this room. So I think I'm going to try to just pull from a few of the things that people have been said and try to wrap a few things together. In particular, I think trying to bring the racial dynamics of this two-tiered system and the economics of it together. So Jack talked about we exist in this two-tiered society, right? And I was just reading something the other day, and I wanted to pull this up. And this was from 2004, so this is already 15 years old. But they said 1% of the population holds 47% of the nation's wealth. 19% of the population holds 44% of the nation's wealth. And 80% of the population holds 9% of the nation's wealth. And then there 20% of the population actually exists underneath that pyramid. So there's a sub-layer to the pyramid as well within that 80%. Yeah, and this was 15 years ago, right? So you think about some of the economic things that have happened that have in the meantime that have probably driven that gap even further. And I wanted to trace the logic of a two-tiered economic system like that to the economic system that we exist within, which is a capitalist one, which basically says that the ruling class, the way in which they stay in power is to, as much as possible, derive as much profit as they can from the working class, right? So there's this economic dynamic at play that drives the formation of this two-tiered society that we live within, right? Which namely says, as much as possible, we try to make money off of those that are beneath us. And I want to tie this to race, too, because I think oftentimes when we talk about race in the U.S., we use the language of hate, and it's more of a feeling or kind of an animosity-driven system. And there is definitely that component to it, but it's also intimately tied to economics, right? So you think about the system of slavery, really slavery was a way in which to reinforce this economic stratification, right? Free, unpaid, exploited labor of black people in order to drive the accumulation and profit of a white ruling class. So that's the dynamic that's at play, and race and economics have always been intertwined throughout the history of our country. So this dynamic of exploitation, economic exploitation, has always had a racial component to it. And we're seeing that play out in this discussion of the two-tiered education system. And so why education, right? We're talking about economics. How does education fit into that? And then I have a question for you all. Why do you go to school? Anybody? Why do you go to school? Why did your parents tell you to go to school?
So I could eventually get a job.
So you could eventually get a job, right? Why did you go to college? Why are you here?
Get a better job?
Yeah, build your knowledge base to be able to get a better job, right? So education and industry have always been connected. It's the feeder for the economic system that we have. And so when we think about the way that race functions within that, this dynamic that we're talking about, this two-tiered education system, is essentially a way for us to begin to groom folks for a stratified economic system that is based on race, right? So, and this goes back all the way, Anne mentioned post-emancipation. Slaves were nominally, in name at least, freed through the Emancipation Proclamation. immediately following that, there was the formation of a body called the Freedmen's Bureau. And the function of the Freedmen's Bureau, created by anti-slavery white folks, was to take freed slaves and begin to train them for industry, right? So the function, they created schools. Of course, education under slavery was banned. You could be killed as a slave if you took any attempt to learn. And so the Freedmen Bureau was what was formulated immediately after the emancipation of slaves. And the function of it was essentially to teach free black folks, how do you function within this? What's your place, your economic job place in this society? And it was overwhelmingly low service waged job, or even unwaged job, right? You think about the function of how sharecropping, if you're familiar with sharecropping, what that dynamic looked like. Education has always had this function of controlling specific bodies of the population to set them up for their place in society. Another example of that is Native American boarding schools. As westward expansion was happening, schools played this central function of one of the generals that formed it said, the function of schools is to kill the native but save the man. Right? There was this cultural genocide that happened in schools in an attempt to get Native folks ready to enter into society,
Taking away
to
their language
integrate
was
their
a big part
society.
of it.
And eliminating their language, their history, all of that was a part of that. So schools have always played this kind of dual role as a form of control, as a form of control for specific bodies, specific racial groups into particular roles within society. And we're seeing that play out in the way in which the two-tiered system functions right now. When we're talking about all these tier 2 schools, we're overwhelmingly talking about students of color. At least, almost, if you look at the percentage of white students in all of these schools, only when you get down about halfway to the page do you see that in any of those schools do you have at least 80% students of color. Right? So we're talking about probably at least, 12,000 students, 12,000 students of color that attend Tier 2 schools in Grand Rapids alone. And overwhelmingly, the disinvestment of these schools is because we say these students aren't ready to be a part of a certain sector of our society. Right? They're low wage, they're tracked into low wage service industries.
Could I just interject? About 4 or 5 years ago, Grand Rapids has 2 different types of diplomas that they give students. One tells an employer that this person has the requisite skills to perform whatever you need them to do. And the other says, yeah, they came here 4 years, but we can't vouch for them. Basically, that's the difference between the two. They actually hand out at graduation, 2 different types of diplomas like that.
Cool.
And so I want to connect that back to the ruling class, right? What's the role of the ruling class in all of this? You guys read that New York Times article about charter systems, the role of Betsy DeVos, and sort of the ideological component of that. But there's money to be made. Money to be made, a lot of money to be made off of the backs of poor students of color. And that's a part of what's driving the dynamic that we're seeing right now. The corporate influence in our public schools, Ottawa Hills recently said that they're going to turn into a career academy. There's 3 academies within that. The first is hospitality, right? You think of the kind of jobs that the hospitality industry provides. The second is Homeland Security. The biggest, broadest sector of Homeland Security is TSA, which is the lowest paid government position. And we'll take away the sort of other forms of control and surveillance and all of that kind of stuff that come out of that body. So 2 of the 3 industries, and the third one, I believe, is a beauty school, right? Cosmetology. So you just think about, this is a school that's 90% black students. and they have a hospitality industry, a homeland security, and a cosmetology a school within. Who are these, what kind of jobs are these students being groomed to take? And the corporate influence in that is really strong and present. So essentially, a lot of these students are being groomed for low-wage service jobs that big corporations profit greatly from,
That's right.
mightily from. Right? If we can keep them in low-wage service jobs, it means if we suppress wages, we make more money. Right? If you're an owner or part of the ruling class or even part of the managerial class, if we can suppress wages, we drive profits, we make money. And so I just wanted to pull apart some of those things. And lastly, Joe talked about this being a public policy question. One of the other functions that Betsy DeVos and the DeVosses have had at the state legislation level is to suppress taxes for the wealthy, right? And so when we talk about investments for education, in part, education revenue is tied to the taxes. There's property taxes at the local level that drive education. You guys talked about Richard Rothstein's book, so you think about how segregation functions within the property tax dynamics of education revenue, but then the state also provides per pupil funding, which is largely driven by the taxes that we pay. But the wealthy, the ruling class elite, have waged a campaign at the state level. They have a lot of money, a lot of influence to suppress taxes on the elite. So your top 1% that we talked about there are paying basically no taxes.
Certainly lower than anybody else.
Certainly
other
lower
than people
than
who are like at
everybody
the very
else.
bottom.
Right.
At the very bottom and the very top, you're essentially paying no taxes.
Right. So the disinvestment in public education is tied to the captains of industry, is what the language says, right? And DeVos's certainly function in that level. So I just wanted to illuminate some of those system dynamics and allow us to have a conversation into a way forward too. That there's an opportunity for us as a public policy question to talk about how do we rethink education funding, right? There's going to be a ballot initiative for 2020 which says we're trying to put in place a graduated income tax, which means the more money you make, the more taxes you make, which makes sense. And that revenue from those taxes drive the education budget, or education revenue deficit that we have right now at the state level, which is huge. There's a whole affordability report that we can send out to folks as well, if that makes sense. So you're going to be able to vote in 2020, and leaning into some of the ways in which the system of industry, I think, drives the dynamics that my colleagues here have been talking about in the education system will be a really good one.
Can I just say one of the things I appreciate about Kyle too is Kyle came here as an international student.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think that has helped you, I don't know if you would agree with this, but see the system so much more clearly
That's true.
than somebody who has been raised in it and taught that it is normal.
Yeah.
That this is normal. Certainly when I've been abroad for extended periods of time, you see a society and you can understand it differently.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the real gifts, and we were talking yesterday with people at Treetops Collective with refugees.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the real gifts of people who come to our community as new Americans is that they put up a mirror and they're like, do you realize what this looks like as somebody who's coming from somewhere else?
Absolutely.
It is pretty clear. It's
Yeah.
not actually that complicated.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that about your voice.
Thank you.
I wonder if we have questions now, is that all right? Dr.?
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about school of choice within the public schools.
Anyone want to tackle that? Let me just say real briefly that the school of choice that we have, Granite Public Schools, are going to specific buildings, and lo and behold, they're tier 1 buildings. And I think that's significant. The school of choice numbers that I've studied and the group of studies show that it has not academically made any real difference. It's placed some hardships on the shoulder, but I'd like some other input from panel members.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to think about school of choice too within the broader dynamic too, right? So public schools are being starved of you get money by having students, right? per
We didn't even
pupil.
talk about count day and the
Yeah,
ridiculousness
yeah,
of count
right,
day.
so there's a lot of dynamics here.
That's so-
So school of choice is both outside of the districts and within the district. So this dynamic, you're already beginning to segregate outside of GRPS, right? You can do a school of choice voucher and go to Forest Hills or
Right.
East Grand Rapids or any of the charter schools. So that already limits the pool. And then you have within the district these theme schools, which are schools of choice, which you have to test into. There's a lottery system involved. There's other kinds of parameters involved to each of the schools. And that then segregates that system further.
And it's all technically colorblind.
Right.
Technically.
But one of the things I wanted to, the school of choice has a lot to do with athletics also. When it comes to school of choice, most of the outlying schools for Grand Rapids are willing to accept the star athletes. If you look at a lot of the leading football, basketball, a lot of those kids are supposed to be Grand Rapids public school students.
Take a look at East Grand Rapids High School's sports teams.
Kentwood.
And then take a look at the racial dynamics of
Yeah.
East
Or
Grand
Christian,
Rapids.
or
We're the only,
Grand Rapids
you know,
Christian for that
Yeah,
matter too.
the black kids are the stars on the team, but they're the only blacks in the school, so that's
Wasn't
the
there a
hardest.
D average requirement at one time? That the
Yeah,
students at least
it
had to
was.
have a D to
It was
do it?
1.6, I'm sorry, it was a D plus.
That's pretty good.
Milton Friedman started the term. Milton Friedman in the South, when the federal government made it a mandatory busing issue, okay, the white families needed a way to get their students back away and homogenize them, and not my term. And what they did is Milton gave them the idea of charter school. And we want the choice of where we can send our schools. Milton Friedman then became a professor at Chicago U, and the charter school was out of the gates after he started that there in the racially strained atmosphere of the South. People will tell you charter schools where educators had this great idea of specificity education. The truth is it had racial components like Ann.
You could find a lot of that if you read the history of education in Mississippi, where a lot of the guild schools and all of that, it was basically how charter schools set up.
Yeah, so on Wednesday, we met with some city commissioners, and they talked about school and like racial,
Two of them were
Yeah.
former school board members.
Sure,
Yeah.
Sunny Day.
Oh, Lord.
Nathaniel Moody and Sunita Lanier are both former school board.
Mr. Moody?
I know.
We all know.
Go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah.
and they talked a lot about how they thought that if people in the community were teaching in schools, it could kind of help some of the issues that are present, like the 100% turnover rate, or, people are invested in their community.
Neighborhood schools.
Students, yeah,
Sunita was advocating for a return to truly neighborhood-based schools and away from a school of choice system.
Yeah, I was wondering what you guys thought about that.
I'm not entirely opposed to it. One of the things that I saw teaching at Ottawa Hills is that there are two things. If you have teachers who maintain a position for a number of years and they get to know the families, you have a lot more pull. Making sure, like if you call and, Big Mama says, come to school, because Mr. Anderson called and said you weren't here, those kids will show up. I think that's important, that you have a continuity that way. But the other part of it is the funding issue. Because what I've seen on the other side of it is, again, you're not given adequate resources to do what you
Yeah,
do.
the equity of the program has to be the same, otherwise there's no validity to that.
Yeah, I just-
Because the neighborhoods are segregated.
Yeah.
So you can.
both that and we
Especially in
exist
this
within
town.
this larger context of choice too, right? So like, how many of y'all went to Christian schools growing up? Yeah, quite a few. So there still exists this dynamic where if you so choose, you can take your kid out and put them in a better school, a quote unquote better school.
Can I say something?
Right.
When I moved here in the 70s, Ottawa Hills was a completely integrated
Yeah.
school. Every year they used to turn out, they had like 2,800 students there. They would turn out 12 National Merit finalists. They had people, and you can see people today who have stickers on their car, OHS graduate. That school was one of the premier schools in Michigan. And I don't even know why the decision was made to start withdrawing resources from Ottawa Hills. Because it was, when I first went there to teach, there was no violence. Teachers stayed throughout their career there. My next door neighbor was one of the first principals there. And he was one man with 2,800 students. Today they've got like 7 principals with 490 students. So it can be done. It can be done because it's been done before.
It's for our priorities.
I'd also just, these are all teachers, and the disinvestment and the fracturing of the teacher workforce is another, I think, dynamic to consider there too.
Oh, that's absolutely true, because if you speak up, your principal and your administrator, your superintendent will find out about it. I know teachers have been blackballed because they spoke up about what was wrong. And they can't even leave the district because when the other district calls up to find out about them, they tell them, oh, they're a troublemaker. You don't want them.
Another question? Sir?
Yeah, last question, Ben.
So what would you say would be an ideal funding solution? Like an ideal funding?
Me personally or the group?
Through taxes, not through private money, number one. No private interest. Right now, we don't have educators running education. We have business people running education. And that's a huge problem. So we need to get educators running the districts, running education policy.
Can I answer that with an actual recommendation? If you go on the computer and you type in the day public schools died in America, or in Michigan, excuse me, NPR, I think, or Michigan Radio. And also, real quickly, the GREJ, if you type that in, you can get on the page at any time.
On Facebook?
On Facebook. That stands for Grand Rapids for Educational Justice, and we welcome you there.
We have been.
Last question? I'm sorry. Yes.
Are there any cities in the U.S. that are doing a good job of like integrating schools and giving students from low economic backgrounds a good shot?
It varies. It really does. I think that Michigan now is next to last in reading proficiency for elementary students. Can you imagine that? When I was in high school, we were at the top in all those categories. You can go to GREJ magazine and see those numbers. We were a stalwart school for education with the great universities in this state, and now we've dropped down to worrisome levels. Where before it was Mississippi, Alabama, and these southern states. To pick some schools that are progressive, that still have the integers of tax base, and Michigan doesn't. California, in many ways, I have to say California.
There are examples, public schools in New York, the state of New York, in New York City. A few public schools in Chicago are making a comeback. One of our teacher friends has a daughter who's part of a consortium there who are doing great things in Chicago. But it's hit and miss. Mm-hmm. It's hit and miss.
Yeah, Louisville, Kentucky has like a citywide desegregation plan. Berkeley, California has one too.
If you read the newspapers, you see in Indiana teachers protesting these very issues of privatization.
Yeah.
Missouri.
West Virginia.
Arizona, Oklahoma.
Louisville, you should check out the Louisville.
Yeah.
It's a cool model, controversial for sure, but the stats are that we're more segregated now than we were at Brown v. Board in terms of racially. So we passed this in 1954 nominally to integrate the schools on what Ibram Kendi would say are assimilationist, racist ideas, because it was done because they imagined that depriving black students of the opportunity to engage with white students was what was causing their problems. So the reasoning behind Brown wasn't good to begin with, but we're more segregated now, or as segregated, depending on where you look, than at that time. And that's one of those statistics, again, that most Americans just are totally
And we've
unaware
been that
of.
way since the founding.
Yeah,
we always have been
ignore
that
it.
way.
Just ignore it, right?
I refuse to be ignored.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you. This was very thorough, comprehensive, evidence-based. I appreciate the wisdom, like Kyle said, in the room. And thanks for coming. Yeah, absolutely.
Southpaws is financially supported by contributions from listeners like you. Help support independently produced media by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio.